Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Furlong, and today we're going to take a look at evidence that supports evolution. Evolution is a scientific theory. In order to be a theory, though, it has to have quite a bit of evidence that helps support it. And so we're going to take a look at just some types of evidence that supports this idea that species have been changing over time. The first one is DNA. Now we know that all organisms have DNA, and now that's not that big of a deal. That's one of the characteristics of being alive is that they have to have DNA. But all the DNA is the same. It's adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine in every species. That in and of itself is not that big of a deal either. But here's what's interesting is that the genetic code is the same in every species. Now remember what the genetic code is. That means that AGG codes for tryptophan. Every amino acid has at least one codon that will code for it. Well, that genetic code is the same in all species, whether we're talking about humans or whether we're talking about bacteria. This could indicate that the genetic code evolved very early on with one of the most primitive species. We also find that the DNA sequence of certain genes are identical in different species. And when I say identical, I'm talking about the individual A's, T's, C's, and G's are the same. Why, in fact, 50% of our genes are exactly the same as that in a banana. Now, I'm not saying that we evolved from bananas. What I'm saying is that we have processes that are occurring inside of our cells, things like mitosis, things like the production of Golgi complexes and ribosomes and ER. All of those things need genes in order to make them. Well, bananas have all those same things. We have all those same things. And so we would expect that the genes are the same, and in fact they are. An interesting thing that has come out from the Human Genome Project is that we're able to find out how old genes are. And it turns out that we have some genes that predate the earliest known mammals. So why do we have these genes then? Maybe we have a common ancestor that went way, way back. The second piece of evidence are homologous structures. Homologous structures are different species that have some common anatomical structures. For example, let's take a look at the forelimb of 7 different species. So we have a frog, lizard, bird, man, cat, whale, and bat. Do you notice any similarities between these limbs? That's right, if you take a look, they all start off with a single bone, and that is the humerus. Now, certainly they all look different from one another, but there's a single bone. It then goes to 2 bones, the radius and the ulna, on all of these. And then from those 2 bones, again they look very different from one another, it goes to a series of small bones, the carpals. And then from the carpals we have various digits or phalanges, most of them having 5. Now the bird has 3, and that's because some of these have fused together. But this pattern of 1 bone to 2 bones to a series of small bones to 5-digit bones is the same in all these species. Well, why is that? Is it a coincidence? Well, maybe they show what's called common ancestry, that all these species might have evolved from a single ancestral species at one point that had this pattern. The third piece of evidence are fossils. Now, fossils are interesting. They're evidence of ancient life forms, so we know that these species existed. Fossils can be a bunch of different things. A lot of times it might just be the hard part of an organism. For instance, we find a shell, or we find parts of a bone or a tooth. But it can be things like impressions in the rock. It could be maybe the actual organism that's trapped in ice or in tar, like in the La Brea tar pits, or in amber, which was hardened tree sap. What these types of fossils tells us is that these organisms that lived in the past, they're no longer present anymore. Where did they go? What happened to them? And why is it that we have species of today that we simply don't find fossils of? The fourth piece of evidence is embryological development. So what we see is that embryos of closely related species have similar embryonic stages. Now this again can show some related ancestries, especially very early on. So for instance, in this first row, these are embryos of 8 different species. And they all look very similar to one another. At this point, you can't tell what any of them are going to become. As they continue to develop, we do start to see some new features, and we can start to pick out what they might ultimately be. Can you find which one is the human? That's right, we're in the last column. Besides just looking at how they appear, scientists also look at organs as they develop. For instance, there are some mammalian kidneys that, as they are developing, look a lot like a reptilian kidney. And then from a reptilian kidney, it develops into a mammalian kidney. Well, the question is, why does it look like a reptilian kidney first? Why doesn't it just develop into a mammalian kidney? We obviously have to have the DNA in order to form a reptilian kidney. Again, it can show potential related ancestry. Another piece of evidence is vestigial organs. Now, a vestigial organ is an organ that no longer has a useful purpose. We still have it, but we don't use it anymore. This could be a remnant from past ancestors that needed those organs. So, for instance, in humans, we all heard of the appendix. That's something we don't have to have, but we also have these ear muscles. And these ear muscles are attached to our ears so that we can move our ears. The problem is we can't move our ears. Other animals can. You know, if you talk to your dog or your cat, you can see their ears are constantly moving, trying to pick up sound. Well, if we can't move our ears, and if we never could have been able to move our ears, why do we have muscles attached to them? In snake skeletons, they have very small leg bones. Well, why does a snake skeleton have leg bones if it never had legs? Maybe it had legs before. Or whales have a pelvis. A pelvis is the bones that our leg bones would attach to. Well, why would a whale, if it's always been swimming in the ocean, why would it have these bones? Maybe it had an ancestor that was walking on land. So these organisms that have these vestigial organs probably share a common ancestry with organisms that have a functioning homologous structure. So for instance, the snakes with these leg bones might be related to some types of lizards that have legs. So those are just a few examples of some pieces of evidence to help support evolution. Certainly there's a lot more out there than that, but this gives us a nice quick broad overview of some of those. Make sure you take a look at your notes as you're preparing for this next test, and I'll see you in class.